Hello and welcome to Technology Connections 2, the channel where I talk about stuff and don't prepare for anything. But today there's more preparation going on than just talking about stuff. So this video is going to be a series of experiments regarding DVD-RAM and how it holds up today. And also things like drive behavior with this opened up slim drive, which you may recognize from the LightScribe video. Plug. Yeah, go ahead and watch that. Now, if you got here and you have not seen the previous video on DVD-RAM, once that card goes away, another one will pop up taking you to that video. Anyway, remember how I said I don't prepare for anything? This is part of that. So what are these three laptops here in front of me? Well, we're going to use all of them. This is my Dell XPS 15. This is my daily driver editing rig, and I use this for, I've made a lot of videos on this machine whenever I'm traveling or am not here. I also have the desktop, which you saw, which is my main editing rig. This is my Chromebook, which I use for writing and research, and you will see that there is on the screen the iOmega zip disk prices. Pretty much do all of my writing and research work on this machine, specifically because I like to separate the two tasks, and this is way overkill for that function. And if I'm out and about and just want to go somewhere to do some work, I'd rather not take this very expensive computer with me. I'd rather take this almost throwaway Chromebook. And it's got a nice keyboard. I bought it specifically for that purpose. I might talk more about that someday later. The middle computer is my old netbook. Now this was my daily driver from probably 2009, late 2009 until 2013 or so. I loved this thing so much. I loved the form factor. It had great battery life. It's an XP machine, which I actually wanted on purpose because when it was available, it came, there used to be this version of Windows 7 called Windows 7 Starter, and that was the only thing that you could get this with. And quite frankly, on full Windows 7, it was kind of a monstrously slow machine because it's the second Intel Atom processor. It is not fast, but in any case, I have it because in my research, I discovered that, well, Windows XP supported FAT32, Windows 10 or starting with Windows Vista, UDF was supported, but you can't format a DVD-RAM disk as a UDF disk or as a FAT32 disk with Windows 10. So I'm going to use this to format a disk as FAT32. And the Chromebook I have just out of curiosity. I want to see how does it work with a DVD-RAM disk, or does it work with a DVD-RAM disk? Before we get into the experiments, one of these 4 DVD-RAM disks, and I didn't really talk about this in the video, has not been used, and you can probably tell which one it is. Just like any optical format, you can see the area of the disk that's been used. But what's interesting about DVD-RAM is you can also see areas that have been reused, particularly with different drives. So for example, on this disk, you can see multiple sessions, if you will, of writing on the disk. Now, these two disks, the two that are almost used up to the edge, were probably used as video transfer disks because that's how I originally started transferring analog video to digital video, was using those Panasonic DVD recorders and these DVD-RAM discs. But I since have a better way to do it. Maybe one day I'll show you that. But I'm gonna format the unused disk in FAT32, and then we're gonna see how this drive behaves while it writes to the disks. I already know that this drive is awful, and you'll see why. But I have a series of different files that we're going to transfer over. I have a file which is a bunch of tiny documents, a file which is a large quantity of JPEGs, a file which is a smaller quantity of JPEGs, and then one close to 4 GB video file, so we can compare how they write. I also have 3 different drives that we're going to use. We're going to use this really bad one, and you'll find out why it's bad, and both of the drives that are in my desktop. Quick note on that. Pretty much, in my experience, any DVD drive that can burn DVDs can use DVD-RAM. I may just be extraordinarily lucky as regards to the particular drives that I've run across, but my old eMachines computer, this drive here, my old laptop, which unfortunately doesn't work, both of the drives that are in my desktop right now, and another like $20 DVD drive that was in some refurbished computer we had at one point in the family, they all wrote and read DVD-RAM disks fine. So I did make that kind of an assumption in the video that most DVD drives made from the mid-2000s onward can read and write to DVD-RAM. Perhaps I've just been had some very weird collection of drives, but I would think seeing that 6 or 7 DVD drives I've used in the past 10 years can all write to these disks, I think is pretty much universal at this point. But anyway, let's get going. Alright, so I'm going to start with the XP machine and formatting the disk that I believe has never been used. We'll find out shortly. Also, I don't know if I've ever used DVD-RAM disks with this laptop. We'll see what happens. I don't have a screen recording utility on here, so this is the best we're going to get, but it doesn't really matter for what we're doing anyway. Now, you may notice how fast the drive is spinning. And this is why I said this drive is terrible for this. You'll find out. Oh good, an auto message. We want to... It thinks this is a CD. Let's just hit cancel to that. Let's see what my computer says. Oh, it says DVD-RAM. Okay, that was weird. We are going to see what formatting options we get. That took a surprising amount of time. Format. Okay, FAT32 makes sense. You think we have 4.26 gigabytes? That's probably the megabyte thing. We're going to call this FAT. Oh, FAT RAM. Make that a quick format. I know. So remember, this is a 3x disk, and the drive is spinning that disk really, really fast. Much faster than it can write to the disk. And that's why this drive is really phenomenally dumb. I think it's done. Is it done? No, I don't think it's started. See, this is great. Riveting stuff. Oh, Windows was not able to complete the format. This may not work as well as I had hoped. Let's try again. I'll tell you, the drive behavior does not appear to be doing anything that would indicate formatting. Now it stopped. Interesting. And Windows hasn't said anything. I don't think this is going to work. Well, we're just going to open this then. And try something different. Okay, what I will try though, as soon as I find the right disk, last thing we'll try with Windows XP is this disk here is a UDF formatted disk, and it has files on it, and we'll see if XP is able to figure that out. It does not appear to have been able to figure it out. Do you show anything? Oh, my computer's not responding. Yay! Well, XP and this particular drive, anyway, don't seem to like each other. So we will move on to newer pastures. Okay, so we are now going to move along to the other parts of these tests. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete everything off of this disk. Interesting, the disk spun up as soon as I started interacting with the folders. We'll just delete everything and we'll see what the laser does. Now remember how I said this disk, or this drive, is dumb? Remember, it's spinning much too fast to write a disk at only 3x speed. Windows and the drive don't seem to be in much agreement with what they're doing. Okay. All the disks, all the files are gone. So I have a bunch of documents. I have a folder that is about 30 megabytes of documents. We are going to copy that onto here. Oh, I was going to get the stopwatch going. Hang on. Oops. All right. Got about a 2-second disadvantage there. Now again, it's spinning up to near full speed, and it shouldn't be doing that. Okay, call me a liar because it worked better than it has been in the past. So it took about a minute, close to that, to move those 20 megabytes. Obviously not great, but not the worst thing in the world. But now let's move over a bunch of large photo files. This thing is about 4 gigabytes, so this will take up most of the disk. Alright, so we are 3 minutes into copying a large folder with about 4 gigabytes worth of information, has a bunch of pictures in it, onto the disk. And right now, things seem to be going pretty well. You can see that the drive is going back and forth between the inner bit of the disk, moving out and writing some information. But if you listen to the speed of the disk, you'll start to notice that this drive is behaving in a way that is probably far more harmful than it is helpful. Notice that every time it goes back to the center, it spins the disk back up to a faster speed, and it has to wait before it can write further data before proceeding. So you can see as the laser's writing to the disk, you can see it pulsing on and off at a high then low intensity at about 50%. I'm assuming that's the data verification built into the format. Everything it writes, it also reads again, which is great for integrity, but it also slows things down. But this particular drive, the fact that it always wants to write at the maximum speed, regardless of context, is really hurting itself. Because every single time the laser goes back to the center to update the file allocation table, which is I'm pretty certain why it's doing that. I think each time it adds a new file, it's saying, oh, it's at these tracks and sectors. That's my assumption there, and I know this isn't a FAT32 disk, so I know it works a little bit differently, but in any case, that's the only reason it makes sense to me that it keeps going back and forth. Anyway, every time it does that, it's changing the speed. And because this is a slim drive, it can't change speeds very quickly. And really, it ought to just keep going at whatever rotational speed it should be going. Because right now, it's writing at that 3x speed. But then it says, oh, I gotta speed up because I'm back in the center. It slows back down when it goes back to the middle of the disk. So this gets progressively worse as it's writing files because it keeps switching back and forth between that high and low RPM, and it's doing that needlessly. What it should be doing is just staying at the low RPM, going back to the center, making that change it needs to make, which is just presumably a few bytes. It's not doing much in the center. You can tell because it, goes back there, brief flash, moves back. So it shouldn't even be speeding up. It should just stay at the speed that it was at, make that change, and go back. And so what ends up happening is the drive is wasting all of this time doing nothing, just changing the speed of the disk. And it's really, really unfortunate because it's making this process go way slower than it should. Windows predicts this is going to take 40 minutes to fill in this drive. Now, a 1x write speed should only take an hour to fill in the disk. Now, you can argue we're only 1.5x speed, so yeah, 40 minutes makes sense, but it's gonna get worse because of the way this drive behaves. So we'll check in a little later. we're only 12% into this write, and already you can see how much worse this is getting. When the laser is out into the disk actually writing file data, Windows reports a sustained write speed of about close to 2 megabytes per second. So right now it's doing good, but every single time it goes back to the center, like it's about to do, now it has to wait until it speeds up again, so Windows reports no data being written. Now it's back out to the edge. And every time it does this back and forth, it has all this idle time waiting for the disk to get to the correct speed. So the firmware of this drive is just bad for DVD-RAM. Now, you can argue that it's better that it supports DVD-RAM than not at all, but writing to disks on this format is just painfully slow. And it should not be this slow. We'll check in a little bit later again, just so you can see how much worse this gets. But if it were able to just stay at that rotational speed, go back to the center without speeding up, like it's doing right now, it wouldn't be wasting nearly as much time. Okay, we're getting close to 20 minutes into this, and it's getting even worse. Windows now thinks this will take an hour and 10 minutes, and it's only going to get worse, I promise you. Now, if you take a look at the behavior of the drive, you'll start to just get more and more frustrated by this stupid speeding up and slowing down it's doing. Every single time it goes back and forth, it wastes time speeding itself back up. Now, whoever wrote the firmware for this drive probably, I would imagine, had something like go do everything at the max write speed possible, but without realizing that DVD-RAM works fundamentally differently than every other optical disc format, that thinking is just disastrously bad, because just watch, it's very frustrating. So, because I don't want to be wasting another hour and a half doing this, I'm going to stop the write process here. See how long it takes for that to happen. Okay, so last test I'm going to do with this drive is I'm going to go back and delete these files off the disk. Okay, now it's interesting how quickly that happened, and the drive basically just marked, hey, all these sectors can be used again, so it didn't have to go back out there and slow down or anything. But now I'm going to take this one big file, I'm going to copy it over, and we're going to see if it behaves a little bit differently. In theory, it could just make one note in the sector information and say this file starts and ends here and just do a bunch of straight through burning, but I have a feeling that's not actually how it's going to work. Now, it is interesting to note here that because this is the UDF file system, it's actually avoiding using the same sectors that it just used because it wants to wear the disk evenly, which is great, but you'll see that now we're already starting at the bad point because it's doing this nonsense of speeding up and slowing down. How lovely. So yeah, even though this is just one giant file, it's still doing all that back and forth nonsense. I'll let it go a little bit longer in case it should decide to improve itself, but I have a feeling it's not going to. Yep, it's just as bad, so we are now going to end the experiments with this drive, move over to my desktop, and do some comparisons there. Alright, now we are at my desktop, and we're going to do the same basic experiments, but this time, it's going to be in the desktop. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to reformat this disk because I hopefully want it to start at the beginning like it was doing. So again, we'll do, and like I said, you cannot pick a file system other than whatever version of UDF you want. I'm just going to do the default one because, yeah, I'm very aware. And we'll have it reformat the disk just so that way we're starting from a similar position. The disk was not freshly formatted when we started, which on the laptop, which is interesting because it did start from the inside portion. So I wonder if it matters when it was last in the drive. Okay, that was quick. Okay, so we're going to start by doing the same exact thing. So I'm going to copy the various documents folder over here. And granted, we are not copying that many files, but it looks to be a more stable speed. Also of note is that the drive does not sound like it's struggling or moving anywhere near as fast. So that only took about 28 seconds. That was faster than the other drive, if I'm not mistaken. So let's start moving the the large photos. Let's start putting them on the disk. Oh, forgive me. So of particular note is that speed, how consistent it is while it's moving over to the disk. So we can see that the speed is dipping a bit, but it's never going to 0 like it was routinely doing on the laptop drive. Also of note, I forgot to say, I'm using the top Asus drive on my tower here. I have 2 drives installed. The Asus one is whatever it came with, or Asus. I used to say Asus. I think it's supposed to be Asus. Someone let me know if I'm wrong, but the Asus drive on top is what I'm using right now. The Blu-ray drive below it came from an older computer that is now serving duty as my parents' media PC, and I stole the Blu-ray drive out of it because I wanted it. Yeah. So we are just using the Asus drive from the top, but its firmware appears to be nowhere near as stupid as the firmware on that slim drive. Its speed is much more consistent, and I can hear it moving back and forth a bit, but the disk speed is barely changing. Let me move the microphone down where you can hear that. So the drive is also changing speeds as presumably the laser moves to different positions, but it's doing it much more quickly, and it doesn't appear to be anywhere near the speed change that the slim drive was doing. Now, it may be just as fast, and it's just that it's in a desktop drive, it's got a more powerful motor, but I'll tell you, it really doesn't seem like it could possibly be that big of a difference. The slim drive really seemed to be almost going full throttle to get back up to the inner writing portion of the disk, which I don't even know. Part of me is skeptical that it was even able to write correctly to the disk doing that. But seeing as we're only 4 minutes into this and we're already 7% complete, obviously this drive is doing a much better job of writing to the disk. Alright, so we hit 20% in 13 minutes, which is significantly better than the other drive, but as I'm sitting here alone in this room with the quietness of everything else in the drive going, I'm beginning to notice it is doing the exact same thing, so take a listen. So it certainly seems as though the behavior from the laptop drive isn't necessarily abnormal for the format, but the laptop drive certainly, I don't know if it's speeding up more, but it definitely takes longer to speed up. So the speed advantage from the desktop drive appears mainly just to be the fact that it has more torque in its motor, and it can get it back up to speed for making changes at the inside of the disk faster. Now, I realize that it probably can't simply keep the disk running at the same speed because I don't know how much it's common for the drive to be able to alter the power of its laser. So it may be that it's forced to speed the disk up to have the same relative linear velocity no matter where it's writing. And it could be that the firmware of pretty much all drives is that way. But before we close this out, I'm going to repeat this test with the third drive on the same disk, do the same exact things we just did, and we'll see how long it takes to get to 20% on that drive. Okay, I've moved the disk to the Blu-ray drive. We are going to format it once again, doing the same exact process. We'll see if this drive is optimized anymore for writing DVD-RAM compared to the other one. Okay, copying the documents over. That looked enticing, but I think that was Windows trickery there. Yeah, about 20 seconds, so the same kind of deal. So we'll start the big pictures folder going. We'll see where we are when it gets to 20%. Well, things are off to an interesting start here. I'm chiming in a lot earlier than I had planned to because we're already to 16% and it's only 7 minutes and 25 seconds into the recording session. So the Blu-ray disc drive appears to be much better equipped for writing to DVD-RAM disks. It is still doing that same behavior of speeding up and slowing down, but it appears to be doing it less frequently. Take a listen. So it's curious because I don't know if it's writing in a fundamentally different way to the disk or what's going on here, because it's the same disk format, the same files, but it's doing that self-interruption much less frequently. So as I'm talking right now, we're going to hit 20% probably around the 9-minute mark. So this Blu-ray disc drive is more than twice as fast at writing to DVD-RAM than the slim drive, and a good deal faster than the DVD drive right above it. Yeah, look at that, almost 9 minutes on the dot, 20%. Wow. And you can see even on the little graph that Windows makes, it's holding steady at close to 2 megabytes per second pretty consistently. And that makes sense given the source I found that if you turn data verification off, you can hit 4 megabytes per second. This is a 3x disk and data verification is on. I didn't even know how you would turn that off. I'm assuming you need to mess with firmware settings of the drive or something. I don't know, but I'm going to let this disk bake while we do one more thing because I want this to actually fill up with files, and then we're going to we're going to see how long it takes to get the files off of the disk. But for now, I want to check the Chromebook, see what it does. So admittedly, this is pretty much just for poop and laughter. I don't even know how Chrome OS will deal with an optical drive. If I can plug it in. Is that an upside down port? No. Oh boy. I haven't plugged anything into the ports on this ever. Well, problem one, that port's not putting out enough power for the drive. So, I'll try the other one. Oh man, these are stiff. What the beeswax? Let me try plugging it in. I don't think it would limit power to it. Well, geez, what do you know? This is the first time I've ever had to do this, and hopefully it works. But the reason why this drive has this weird cable is because it has another USB plug to scavenge more power from another port. And I've had this drive for years. I got it for the netbook, so I've had it probably close to 10 years now. I've never had to use that. But now the drive is awake, we got the blue light. So, Chrome OS, what will you do with one of these? Something's happening. Something weird is happening. Hey! Removable device detected! Look at that! This is how, these are files from the DVD recorder, so this is how they natively look. Okay, now I need to see if it can write to something. Here's an SD card that I have no idea what might be on it. It's like photos. Oh hey, look at that! Are these videos or photos? We'll see. Anyway, can you copy this onto here? Whoops. Fingers crossed. Doesn't look like anything's happening. Hang on now. Just one of you. Copy. Paste. Okay, well, it can read files from the disks, but it does not appear to be able to write to them. The only other thing that may be the case is that this, I don't even know what file format the disk is. It might be FAT32. I would imagine it's UDF since it came from the DVD recorder. But I will try with the disk we're writing right now on the desktop, just in case. But interesting to know that it can, in fact, read anyway DVD-RAM disks. What do you know? Alright, it took just over 57 minutes to burn all the files to this disk, and I want to show you, hopefully you can see, the variation is completely gone. So now that the disk has, all this space has been burned by one drive in one go, it looks completely uniform all the way up to the edge. Hopefully this is in reasonable focus, but there's no more visible rings like on this disk here, where you can see different rings from different burns. Since this was all done by the same drive, you see just that one uniform volume there. Also curious if this will focus close enough. Okay. It went, so the sector blockings, they follow a very interesting pattern on the disk. So right at this portion of the disk, they're all lined up, and then as you go around, they get more and more out of alignment. When you're on the opposite end of the disk, they look like they're lined up again, but it's actually every other one. And then of course, they reconverge as you get to the end. But you can see how on this disk, it went through most of the third to the last sector blocking. Interestingly, on DVD-RAM, the last two sector blockings are lined up around the entire edge. Not really sure why that is. I'm assuming that is two usable sectors and it's not like just extra space. But whatever. But anyway, what I want to do now is refocus. Thank you. And now we will read all those files back off with this drive, because while DVD-RAM is, as we've seen, very slow to write to, at least read times aren't so hampered. So we'll take a look at that. Okay, so that was really weird. I had to reboot the computer because it wasn't recognizing the drive. So I don't know what that was about, but let's put the disk back in. Hopefully we're getting somewhere on some front. Thanks. Okay, now we have something happening. So I'm going to just copy this folder, which, if you recall, is... because I don't even recall. How big is it? It's almost 4 gigabytes. So we will copy this onto the desktop and see how long it takes. And I forgot to start the stopwatch. But you can see that the disk is spinning at a very high speed. It will basically just stay at that speed, and the data transfer rate should go higher as it goes towards the edge of the disk. So I think I'm going to wrap this video up here because, as you can see, the read speed of DVD-RAM doesn't really matter. As with most optical formats, the write speed is the only limiting factor because of the alloys or the dyes that are used in the disk. So in this case, it's just going to keep on creeping up in read speed probably until the very end, because it's at this point reading at constant angular velocity, so the data is going to keep speeding up as the laser reads it. But anyway, that's it. Hope you enjoyed these experiments into DVD-RAM. Obviously, the format is wicked slow by today's standards. I mean, even this, any optical disc, is very slow when you can read, from a quick flash drive in seconds. The amount of time it took to move the files onto the flash drive that I used for moving the files between the computers, that 4 gigabytes moved in maybe 30 seconds. So the fact that it took near an hour on DVD-RAM is fairly pathetic. But it was, for a technology from 1998, I think this is pretty impressive. And even into 2005 and maybe even 2008, having 4 gigabytes on a disk that you could use just with any software, any computer, copy, paste, do whatever, doesn't need any special formatting, I still think that was quite unique. And I'm still a little puzzled that DVD-RAM didn't really go anywhere, but it is what it is. Anyway, thanks for watching.